All right, we're good.
All right, call this meeting to order at 6:34. Roll call.
Denny Mariola,
Here.
Rick Charles,
Here.
Dennis Campbell,
Here.
Nancy Benzel, Janice Arch, Christina Stats, Amy Jones. Here.
All right. Everyone get a chance to look at the minutes? All right. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, old business. 4.08, meetings held in different locations to accommodate larger crowds if needed.
One moment, it's now saying it's acting up.
Okay.
What does it do?
Do we have internet?
We won't need to restart, but just hold on a second while we.
Okay.
And again, this is registered voters. This isn't population because I don't have population by ward. That would be something that we'd have to do a deeper dive in. So we just use registered voters. Ward 1 has 6,345 registered voters. Ward 2 has 6,751 registered voters. Ward 3 has 5,463 registered voters. And Ward 4 has 6,794 registered voters. Now, I'm sure you want a little bit more of a breakdown, so I also did percentages of the total registered voters. So in Ward 1, it's 25.03% of registered voters, or of the city. Ward 2 is 26.63%. Ward 3 is 21.55%. And Ward 4 is 26.80%. So happy to answer any further questions about that, but I can send this out if anybody wants this for their records, but it was just something we kind of threw together because, looking at the ward map is one thing, but then also seeing the further deep dive into it of what does this actually mean by the numbers, we figure was helpful in that discussion. So
What was the percentage for Ward 3 and Ward 4 again?
yes, Ward 3 is 21.55% and Ward 4 is 26.80%.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome. I think that's just good data for us to have for our last discussion too. We can just use it in potentially use some of the data in our town hall just to share about what we think maybe the wards that we don't think we can get it done in this commission, but potentially send it off to them.
Yeah, and a procedural question then, how would we present that to council in terms of findings? As a recommendation.
Yeah,
We vote to say this is a recommendation. How do we get that to council? How do we get that in front of council to say, we recommend that, and this is how we would think you would go about doing it or whatever?
Yeah, and I would leave this up to the Charter Review Commission, but my thoughts are, based on the conversations we're having here, I'm assuming you guys are planning on, say we get 5 potential changes out of the first half, after the town hall and after the meeting, we say you guys want to move forward with these 5. My guess is that when we present those to council, I would ask Dennis as chair to be at that council meeting, and that would just be an agenda item, but not necessarily a resolution that they would vote on.
Okay.
So that would be like an action item that you guys would vote to make the recommendation, and we can draft something up of what that recommendation looks like, what it means, and then everyone can approve it. Or it can be as simple as, Dennis, while you're giving your report on the 5 items, you also mentioned that this is something we looked at and we recommend this. It can be as informal or as formal as you guys want, and we can come up with drafts if you like, or again, we're at your beck and call.
Right. Okay. Perfect.
And then any other questions on that? All right, 4.16, timeline of filling vacancy, state code.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We pulled up the state code because as we we've talked about previously that there are recommendations about, or if the city doesn't have a charter, the state code is what is the governing body of it. And now in our instance, because we have nonpartisan elections, so let me pull it up real quick. I had it at the front of the page. Now I can't find where I put it. You have it, Steve? Yeah, so in the event that there is a vacancy in a village, it is a 30-day timeline for the mayor to fill that appointment, or for the city council to fill the appointment, or the mayor gets to do it. If it is a partisan election, there are 45 days to fill it, and it's filled by the precinct committee of the party of the person who held it before. And just for everyone's edification, the reason there's an expanded from 45 or from 30 to 45 days is it takes longer time, and there's some state qualifications about getting out notice for a PC meeting or a precinct committee person meeting. But it is 30 days in the event. 30 days if it's filled within the city, and 45 if it's filled by the precinct committee people. So mirrors the language that we have in our charter about 30 days to fill those seats.
We have 45 in our charter, right?
Do we? I thought it was.
On
School
416.
board was 30.
Is
That
it?
was what you
Okay.
had referenced.
Oh, okay.
Yes?
Yep, I remember that because that was the why isn't it faster?
Yes. I think part of that is also a mechanism of our city council meets twice a month as opposed to once a month.
Yeah. Gives them time to run the process. Okay.
Yeah, I would always recommend too, the more time you have the ability to not rush an appointment. You can have an open, vacancy, and people can submit applications. You have an interview process, that sort of thing. If you start restricting it down a little bit, it's doable, but it runs into that risk of, there's a potential that you're running up on timelines.
Mhm.
It's actually really interesting. I was doing some case law research, and there was a case I found out of Youngstown back in the 20s that there was a case of a split on council between two parties, 3-3, and there was a vacancy on the one seat, and the mayor was one party. So the 3 members of the council went to Florida for 30 days and hid out until the timeline passed so that they were able to deny quorum. And so it was a very interesting case, but it was from Youngstown. It was from 1927. So if anybody wants to read it, I could forward that over.
That
But
fits so much.
I was gonna say, it's a
For
very Youngstown.
yeah, it reminded me that a similar thing happened in Wisconsin in about 2010, 2011. I was an undergrad studying political science, and it was happening right there that a bunch of one members of a party fled the state to try and deny, because if they were still in Wisconsin, the House of Representatives had the ability to send state highway patrol officers to round them up and bring them to force the vote. So just a little interesting tidbit of history that I found while I was doing the research. So thank you for asking me to follow that up, because I wouldn't have ever found that case if I hadn't been doing that research.
He's so excited by finding that research.
It's from the 20s too.
Yeah, that's what made it even better, right? Like,
Well, the council's on the land. All right, so any other questions on the filling vacancy? Awesome. All right, we'll move into new business, Article 6, Department of Finance. Do you want to give us the overview here?
yep, and it's funny, we actually set up, four of the articles to look at tonight, but upon further review, these should be rather quickly, because if you notice, if you did some looking ahead, a lot of these haven't changed in a while, and a lot of these are kind of standard practices. However, we do have some comments that we want to make on this section in the Department of Law. So first, we'll start at section 6.01. That's the Director of Finance is the head of the finance department. and they're elected at large. The whole city votes on it, and it's a 4-year term, and they hold their office until the successor is elected and qualified. Any questions on that one before we move on?
So when we say depart, and I did have this question, this is
Yeah.
a general question for both finance department and law department. Employees within the finance department report to the director of finance, are still employees, obviously.
Correct.
And if they're deemed civil service positions, and they have to go through the commission rules and all that.
Correct.
But they report to the finance director, not the mayor,
Correct.
and not council.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And that's the same with the law
Yep.
department, I believe.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
Moving on, 6.02 is the qualifications. The first section there, the first paragraph is that they have to be a qualified elector and they have to have lived in the city for at least a year prior to the declaration of candidacy. It's very similar to the other provisions we saw. This next section is this is the main addition, just so you're aware of 2010, that 11/2/2010. Is they put in the requirements that they have a knowledge of municipal accounting, taxation, budgets, and financial control, and hold a minimum of bachelor's degree in accounting, finance, economics, or public administration from an accredited college or university, and at least 5 years management experience in accounting or finance from any of the following: corporate, business, municipal, county, or federal entity prior to the election. The next section is just that they have to be full-time and devote full-time to the office. Full-time is not defined. It's very similar when you get to the law department, and we talked about this with the mayor. It's not defined as full-time, but they just have to dedicate it. That's partly because there are some cities that have part-time finance directors, part-time law directors, part-time mayors. But this kind of goes in line with the next, where they can't hold elected office while also employed as an official. They can't be an elected office and then hold like a part-time position in another elected official of the city.
So they can't be a council member.
Correct. Yeah. Yep.
And then you said full-time there's no definition of full-time, but full-time has some assumptions.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that if there is a question whether or not the finance director, or as we talked about, the law director too, that if there was a question by council or a question by the mayor, that person was not fulfilling the full-time position. If they were only working 2-3 hours a week, they had this other position over a good year that they were doing, not fulfilling time over here, that would then be a subject to impeachment.
Yes, and they would base it on they don't have the qualifications because they're not devoting the necessary time. Yep.
Right. Okay. So there's an out then to say, come back to and say, okay, we got an issue with this finance director. Here it is. Do an impeachment.
Yep.
And then blah, blah, blah. And
Yep.
everything else gets back. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any questions on that qualifications? All right. Duties in general, you see this hasn't changed. They just have charge of the administration of fiscal affairs within the municipality, and it extends over all departments as long as it deals with fiscal responsibility. It is the purview of the finance director. They examine and audit all the accounts, offices, employees, boards, and commissions. They're the financial advisor. They prepare the annual financial budget. They report to council about the affairs. So if you've watched a council meeting, you'll see that the finance director gives a finance report during the finance committee, listing off where we're at on taxation, revenues, where balances are, if there are any big notes coming up or promissory payments, that sort of thing. And then any fiscal duties that council may determine as well. That's the bare minimum that they serve as. You'll also see, if you're ever curious, when you look at a contract signed by the city, there is always a section, because as we all know, the mayor is the signatory for the city, but there's also a section that the law director signs saying approve as to form, which means I've reviewed the contract. And there's also a section from the finance director saying I certify that these funds exist. And that's kind of that auditing purpose that the finance department looks over the contract to make sure, hey, we're not spending money we don't have, or that hasn't been appropriated. As you guys know, the council
Right.
makes the appropriations. Okay.
So the question I had, as I read that piece of it through, was that under the mayor section, 3.04, it says the mayor with the assistance of the Department of Finance shall submit a proposed operating and capital budget for consideration.
Mhm.
This one says it's,
They assist council in the preparation of the annual.
right, it advises the mayor and assists council. Is there any opportunity for contradiction in there, or the finance director not operating with the mayor, and that would put the mayor's responsibilities at risk?
No, because this is almost like checks and balance that the finance director will comment and say, because here's the thing. Council approves the budget, the mayor prepares it. Council can change the budget however they want.
Right.
This is the finance director is telling you, these are what we can and can't afford. Council can spend money that if the finance director says we can't afford that,
It's not gonna get spent, essentially.
if the money's not there.
Yeah.
Now, they can pass and say, you know what, we're gonna go put out a bond issue and we're gonna borrow money and that's how we're gonna pay for it. That's council's prerogative. The finance director is just there to say, I don't think that's a good idea, or I'm assisting you and telling you that's not a good rate for that bond that you went and got. So I don't think there's any contradiction in there or potential, because there's a division of labor and a division of duty. They can also, when I offer my legal advice, they don't have to take it, because legal advice is one part of it. There's also operational advice and small p political concern of like, what will the community think about this?
Right.
So this is just saying that it's the finance director's duty to prepare that and assist with that.
Okay. But it's the mayor's responsibility to deliver it,
Correct.
council's responsibility to approve it, and blah, blah, blah.
And there's also an interesting provision that we get to at the very end about budgeting process that they have added in
Right.
some additional budgeting thing that we'll talk more in depth about how the budget's prepared, when it's prepared, and that when we get to it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Next section, again, hasn't been changed. This is best practices about accounting procedures and budgetary controls, that the finance director shall establish and maintain accounting procedures necessary for completing financial records. They keep the separate accounts. This is basically, when you look at the budget, this is saying we have line items in the budget, we have different appropriations, we have different funds that council can create, and the finance director puts out there. And then it just says that whatever form we use has to meet the requirements of the charter of the council, Bureau of Inspection and Supervision of Public Offices. We get audited once a year by the state. This is just saying that our policies and procedures have to align with auditing procedures as well.
That was gonna be my
Yeah.
question about audits. So.
Yep, we are audited every year, and then it's interesting too, because once you get so many audits in a row that are high marks, the state then has you contract with a private entity to perform the audit. So it's not a state audit. It's still a state audit for the auditor's office, but it's not the state auditors that are doing it. It's a third party. And it's actually interesting because state auditors are state auditors. Private auditors and private accountants are private accountants that can also see, hey, you might have been doing this and this is what the state is doing, but here is another weak point we're seeing, or a point of thing that you might want to fix. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to think about how we're going from one auditor and going to a different entity to do it, but it's another fresh set of eyes and a completely different field that might be saying, hey, you're doing great on this, but what you're overlooking is this. And we're in the sector right now where we're having the private companies that are actually doing the audits. And they also, just an FYI too, they also audit more than just our finances. They audit our public records requests, which I talked about in our first training about how we have to keep a log And we get audited on that, and they do random sampling. They say, here are the 15 public records forms that you turned in that says these are all the public records. I want to see this one, and this one, and we have to produce it to make sure we actually fulfilled and we were following the law on that. So it's a further audit than just financial audit, but it falls into this as well. Next, custody of funds, very similar. It's just that the finance director receives and accounts all funds, and they deposit it in a depository designated by council. So council picks which bank we use for our deposits. And then things are turned over to the finance director. So the way it works is, say you have a building permit that you want to build a shed or something in your backyard. You don't pay the finance director, you pay the building department. This is just saying that each board, commission, office employee has to turn it over to the finance director, so that the finance director is then accountable to it.
You don't want too many people handling that money.
Exactly. Or holding it for any length of time. You know?
Sitting in a drawer.
Yes, exactly. And then same thing with disbursements, 6.06. It's the finance director can only disperse funds as authorized by resolution or ordinance. This is where I said that no obligations shall be incurred and no expenditure shall be made unless approved by the director of finance and certified that there is an unencumbered balance of appropriated. That's that certificate of available funds that the finance director signs on every contract. And it's funny because frequently a lot of these companies that we deal with are not used to that sort of thing. So I actually have a file of just that I will attach at the end of documents to make sure they get signed when I'm reviewing it as to form, because that's a pretty normal procedure that your attorney will look over a contract. It's relatively different. It's kind of a public entity thing that the finance director looks at too. It says we have the money and it's been encumbered and appropriated by city council. Yep.
So just a procedural question on when
Yeah.
city council says spend this money on this, does it usually come with a timeline? Or could, I literally just in my notes said, what happens if the finance director doesn't process the things? Or says there's no timeline that's forcing me to do, maybe they disagree with it, maybe they,
Yeah, so
I know I'm going what ifs on it.
No, absolutely, because that's part of the reason we write these laws and these procedures is for what if situations. Typically, because of the appropriation, the ordinance, and then auditing purposes, they have to be spent that calendar year unless we then roll it over and council approves the rollover. So you'll see that in appropriation ordinances, and you'll also see updates in appropriations. So council might have appropriated the budget X number of dollars. Will we find out that we need more funds in that specific allocation because project came in bigger, we had emergencies that needed to fix water lines. They'll then amend the appropriations there as well. This is where, I don't know if we've talked about it at all about mandamus actions.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
This is one of those things that if there was an allegation that it wasn't being appropriated, or it was appropriated but wasn't being spent or certified, there could be a good case for the city council to then file a mandamus action against the finance director to force them to do that.
Okay, cool. Just want to make sure.
Yep. All right, vacancy. This is the section that they have a replacement to, or the mayor has the ability for up to 75 days to appoint a temporary replacement in the event of death, resignation, recall, or removal to the director of finance. That's where so this is similar where we talked about before how the finance director and the law director are different than the mayor, in that the finance director and the law director serve until the next municipal election, not the next actual election. So example, case in point right here, I was appointed in February or January of last year. I serve until this municipal election, as opposed to having to force an election last year to fill this seat. It's the same thing with the finance director.
You don't necessarily fill up the term, just fill up to the next municipal election.
Correct.
Okay.
So So it's a maximum of 2 years you get. Like if I took over at the beginning of a term, it was 2 weeks into the term,
Right.
but the maximum you can get is January 2nd, right after the law director sworn in or the finance director sworn in, something happens, someone's appointed immediately. The maximum you're going to get is that 2 year until the next municipal election. The difference here is that also if the vacancy occurs 30 days prior to the filing deadline for petitions, the person serves the remainder of the term. So next municipal election is this fall. The petitions deadline is August 12th, I think. Don't quote me on that. Sometime early August. If the vacancy occurred 31 days before that, the person could then serve the remainder of the term instead of making them go pull petitions, go get them all signed, and then turn them in 31 days. That person can serve basically the 2 years that they would have got if it happened. So it's like kind of that's the cutoff as opposed to January 2.
So let's say, and none of these dates are accurate.
Yeah.
Let's say it's August 12th is the petition pull, so that would be, or petition pull in, so that would be July 10th.
Yeah.
Right, 31 days. So if the position is filled on July 15th, right, then that person then would serve the rest of that year and the next 2 years.
Yes. Until the next municipal election, which would be 2 years after that.
Using this year would be 2027.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, and I know we'll talk about term limits when term limits come because it's 10 years.
Yep, and that's part of the calculus.
So there is a calculus in the term limit piece of it too to talk about.
Yep.
Okay. Understood.
That was one of the things that was actually fixed because the 10-year section actually came about in the last 3 years.
Right. That was in 2022. I think they fixed it, right?
Yes. It was the 2022 election. So the appointee shall be deemed qualified under the provisions set forth. So this is also the residency requirement can be waived in the event of just the remainder of the term. Council determines that and waives that because council has to approve of the confirmation of council. Like council confirms the appointment of the mayor. So the mayor appointed me on January 18th. Council confirmed me on January 25th. That's council would be the one that would determine, hey, you don't have to fill the residency requirement for the remainder of this term. And that's partly because like in the event of a deputy law director getting appointed law director, they might not live within the city because there's no residency requirement to be the deputy, but you want someone in the actual role for the remainder of the term. And because there are qualifications more than just being an elector of the city, you're limiting your pool of people who can be appointed to that position. So that's the kind of the justification why there's a waiver for the residency requirement, but not the other qualifications. Right.
So we could have someone from Akron.
Yeah.
Temporarily.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. You see, it says such residency waiver only applies towards the remainder of the term. So that person, if they wanted to then serve, would have to move to the city in that time period and meet the other requirements.
Right.
It's just we're filling a gap, basically. And then this last provision is also one of the ones we want to talk about. I had a conversation with the finance director. It says the assistant director of general shall have immediate acting power of the director, regardless of residency, until the replacement is appointed. So, and this is similar to the when we get to the law department. When my predecessor left on January 12th, I, as deputy, immediately became acting deputy or acting law director until the mayor officially appointed me and council confirmed as that. That's similar here. Now, the issue that we ran into and that I talked about with the finance director and that we wanted to throw out there and see what you guys felt about this is this says in the event of death, resignation, recall, or removal. It doesn't have a provision similar to the mayor having an acting mayor in the event of incapacity. There is no provision of an acting finance director. This only applies if the seat becomes vacant, not if the finance director is incapacitated. And I will just be candid, we had that situation happen earlier this year due to a medical disability. Our finance director had to recover for a period of time. There is no provision that there was someone that was acting finance director in the charter. There, we have some ability to have signatory authority passed off based on, appointment, that sort of thing. But there's nothing that talks about acting finance director in the event of temporary incapacity. And the same goes for law director. We don't have those two provisions. So if you would like to see a draft of something similar to the mayor section, but maybe similar to this where it says the assistant finance director of the general division, we could have that in the event of incapacity, the assistant director of general division becomes the acting finance director until such time as the finance director is, returned to the capacity. But it was something that I talked about with the finance director, that language currently doesn't exist.
Drew, doesn't what you just said,
Yeah,
doesn't that last sentence, paragraph, the assistant director of the general division shall have immediate acting power of the director? Isn't that covering it?
no, because under statutory interpretation, that section falls under the vacancy header. So that means it has to be in the event of death, resignation, recall, or removal. Then the assistant director of finance has immediate acting power.
So
But-
you'd have to open up this one to be a little bit more explicit as to when.
Yeah, it'd be like incapacity, similar to the section where the acting mayor is, where it says there's like those 4 things that are enumerated. Here, let me find it real quick. If the mayor is temporarily absent from the municipality, so if the finance director is temporarily absent from the municipality, inaccessible, unable for any cause or reason to perform the duties of the finance director, we wouldn't put that last section in there because it doesn't apply to this, but we could craft some language that's very similar to that if there's a temporary incapacity, there is an acting finance director.
What did we do when the last sentence happened?
And that's where I said what we did was logistically, technically, we still had the finance director. The finance director just signed a memo that said this person can sign on my behalf as a kind of belt and suspenders, but they were still the finance director, and the person that was signing on their behalf had approval authority, but it was not the acting finance director. So we did run into some situations where like, this needs to be signed by the finance director. We would then have to get a hold of Kelly Toppin and be like, hey, this one has to be signed by you because this person's signing on your behalf, but they are not the finance director or acting finance director.
I think it would be important to see a draft of that, especially because something like this has happened.
Yeah, and if you add anything to that, keep it simple.
No, yeah, no,
Yeah.
simpler the better. I
Yes.
agree.
As Rick has emphasized, the more simple and straightforward we can make it, the better it is.
There's a reason that we have clarifying language on the agenda for the acting mayor section.
Yeah, I'm glad you covered the piece because you were mentioning that there might be some tools and I was gonna ask about that tool piece, but clearly it doesn't always work.
Correct. Yeah.
So it was one thing for someone to be out for a medical situation, whole different situation for someone to be incapacitated
Mhm.
in a situation.
Yeah.
So, okay. Awesome.
And that rounds out the finance director section. So Department of Finance, that's one fourth of the way done tonight.
Woo.
The assistant director of general division is a actual title, actual office within the finance department.
It's funny that you say that because it currently doesn't exist as a position within the city. It's something city council is talking about right now. The person that held that position retired, and for whatever reason, when the way the last payroll ordinance that we went through and did a whole comb through, council took that position out of the payroll table because there was no one in the position. The finance director has proposed to put it back in the table to then try and appoint someone to it in the future. But right now, how it would work is, say we draft this change, we put it in place. If there is no person in that position, it would just, there wouldn't be an acting finance director if the position was vacant.
Until the mayor appointed one.
Until the mayor, appointed a finance director, yeah.
Right.
But there wouldn't,
be an.
if there was no assistant director of the general division,
Right.
then it would just skip it as it wouldn't go to the next person in line because
Right.
it's not like the federal government where if there is no vice president, it's the president pro tem and then the speaker,
Speaker, then president.
Speaker, okay, we'll get them mixed up. And then it's Secretary of State, right?
Yes,
Yes.
Secretary of State. Then you start
I
going.
think it's the Department of Defense, then it's the Secretary of State. So that
Is
was the
it?
whole Alexander Haig thing during the Reagan administration, when Reagan got shot.
Yeah.
He goes, I'm in charge.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a whole thing like, well, technically, the Department of War, which is now the Department of Defense,
There was a whole,
was established prior to the Secretary of State.
there was also a thing about Madeleine Albright wasn't allowed to be in the chain of command because she
she's
was
not an American born citizen.
correct.
According to USA.gov,
Yeah,
it's Secretary of State, Treasury, Defense.
then defense.
Yeah, so defense is
okay.
after state and treasurer.
I thought there was a whole thing that.
There probably was at some point.
Hey,
There probably
maybe that's why it is Secretary of
that's what I'm
State,
saying,
because
yeah.
there was a whole thing.
was. Who knows?
It's always
You can
funny.
research that.
Yeah, I'll look into it.
That's really important for this commission.
It's nothing like a crisis to show that, hey, we need a policy for that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty good.
All right.
All right, so again, moving into Department of Public Service.
Wait, going back real quick.
Yes.
So council is working on solving the issue that they have, that they've created a conflict with the charter right now. Potential conflict.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think it's it leads to, the charter tells us, it doesn't say you have to have an assistant
Yeah,
finance director. It just,
At least right now,
Yes.
there's a gap.
correct,
Council's reviewing it to try to fix the gap potentially.
correct.
Great. Cool.
Yep.
So I just wanted to make sure I was clarified on that.
Nope,
so.
you're absolutely correct. All right, so Department of Public Service, this is another department within the city, appointed by the mayor and confirmed by council. That should be pretty standard. You see most of these department heads are appointed by the mayor and then confirmed by council. Any questions on that one? Okay. This one, it's just the qualifications that they have to be selected based on their knowledge of executive and administrative qualifications, their experience, their knowledge and accepted practice to their duties of their office, and they're not required to be an engineer. It's pretty vague intentionally that, they have to have qualifications, but we're not going to say you have to have a bachelor's degree in this and that sort of thing. It's just you have to have experience and be qualified. And that's kind of the check and balance on that, is the mayor determines whether they're qualified and then council can confirm or deny based on those qualifications.
That's fine.
And then next is their responsibilities: construction, improvement, maintenance of all public works, buildings, grounds, cemeteries, parks, roads, streets, and all other public places. And then they supervise the maintenance of all municipal property and equipment, storage of all materials and supplies. They issue the building and zoning permits, which you'll also see we have a zoning and permitting process. And then if you look in the codifieds, we also have a director of planning and zoning, which you met tonight, who was, hello, Zach Cowan. That's, so they're issued from the director of public service, but we have a planning department that actually handles the process for that. And then they supervise the administration and enforcement of all zoning and building ordinances. And then anything else council tells them to, and that's elaborated in the codifieds.
There's so much trouble to sort out.
And then the next section is the purchasing function. So this is basically, we have one purchasing agent for the city. That's the director of public service. They go through and approve all purchases and make sure that everything has followed proper procedure. I will say this, we have our own software that basically does all those checks for him. So he doesn't have to comb through and look at every single purchase to make sure it's been bidded, if it needed to be bid, or it meets some of the exemptions, whether or not it follows all the procedure. We have software that does that, but it has to be approved by the public service director. And then this next section is all about formal competitive bidding, which is further elaborated in our codifieds under section 173. But this mirrors state law, that there is a bidding process, and if there's an exemption to the bidding, it has to be explicitly enumerated. There's a provision in there about informal bidding, about basically quotations for 3 prices if you don't have to get formal bidding. Our codifieds actually have a formal bidding, informal bidding, and then exempt from bidding process in it as well. But this is just basically, again, I've said it before, belt and suspenders of state law about contracting and purchasing power. And then the last section there is that subject to appropriations by council, they can employ assistants and employees as necessary. So it just says, this basically says council approves the budget for who's in there, and as long as it's within the realm and the necessary need of the city, the public service director can employ those assistants and other employees. I will say in our codifieds, it also says that apart from civil service positions, council approves all hiring of all employees, but that's in our codifieds. So it's a further reinforcing of this policy. Any questions on public service? It's a pretty brief chapter, and it's pretty broad intentionally. All right. Now, public safety. So the director of public safety shall be the head of the Department of Public Safety, and the mayor is the director of public safety. However, the mayor can appoint someone else to be the director of public safety if that's necessary. And it just says that council confirms that person if they then decide, if the mayor wants to hire a director of public safety. Currently, the mayor is the director of public safety.
So do we not have a police chief?
We do, but
Public safety is different than police chief.
no, so the police chief would report to the director of public safety.
I had no idea.
And it's the mayor, so the police chief reports to the mayor.
Still get calls from.
Is that normal?
Department.
I never thought of mayors in that function of being safety.
Yep. Just one of the executive.
I read it and I was like,
It's one of the executive functions of the mayor. But that is normal that the police chief reports to the mayor.
okay.
Same thing with fire chief.
But he has the authority, and if council approves, to appoint a director of public safety.
Correct. Yeah.
So you could elevate the police chief into that role
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
hire a new police chief type of thing.
Correct. Yep.
And then that person would report directly to the mayor then.
It would just be adding middle management.
Yeah.
Now, and there could be an instance like in a big city where you would want to have,
An extra.
like the city of Akron has a director of public safety that the police chief, I don't know if they currently do, but they have in the past had a director of public safety that reports directly to the mayor, and then the police chief and the fire chief report to the director of public safety.
I believe they do.
They have it again. Okay. I knew they did under the previous mayor. I assumed they did under the current one. The duties, this is right where it says right there that they are the head of the EMS service, the police and the fire departments. One comment I'd like to throw out here, it's a minor thing. The city does not have dispatchers anymore. And that's that safety services communication center. That's the final section right there where we can enter into a agreement with other municipalities to have a dispatch center. So the city doesn't have dispatchers anymore. So if that's something you guys would want to correct in there.
The city doesn't have dispatchers, but it could technically, again, if it ever withdrew from the, so I think it's probably better to leave it in.
Just leave it as is.
Leave it as is, because it's a safety net.
You got it. I just wanted to bring that up. That is something that changed. We have it's called the SARCOG, and I can't remember what it stands for. Safety area,
Yeah.
something,
But
but
we collaborate with Cogga Falls on that. don't
yes,
we?
yeah.
Mm, is
Cogga
there
Falls, Talmadge, Farallon, and the county, and then Stow are the SARCOG. We just had a SARCOG board last Thursday.
another? It's so random that Fairlawn's included because it's quite a little
If
wiggle
you,
away from us.
yeah, it's actually funny because I was at the county when the conversation first started. I was working for the executive's office, and what happened is the state basically started saying we're only going to fund so many dispatchers per county. And what it was, Stowe had its own dispatch, Cogga Falls had its own dispatch, Farallon had its own, Akron has its own.
Had to collaborate.
So yeah, it turned into they're only going to fund 2 of them, and it's going to be the top 2. So why don't we band together with a bunch of the smaller ones, as opposed to be engulfed and have to go to the city of Akron or something like that. So what happened is they created what's called a council of governments. That's a COG. So that's where the COG and SARCOG comes from. And they basically are another council. They have their own meetings and they have their own board, and it's made up of each one of the member communities has one vote on that board. So the mayor
Only related to public safety.
only related to dispatch. It doesn't even pertain to public safety.
Not
It's
the
just,
rest.
no, it's just dispatch. And that's, if you're familiar with the old Weaver School over in Talmadge, that's where the dispatch center is now.
I was wondering what was in there now.
It's right on the corner.
Yep, completely
I drive by
renovated.
it all the time. Go
Yep.
to my grandmother's.
Yep, completely
I always see,
renovated
like,
inside.
Sheriff's cars in the thing.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
that's-
related to that.
Yeah, that's the county function, is the sheriff's office has that. And they also rent to the city of Akron, maintains their own dispatch center within the facility. So there's also some economies of scale because we've put basically a data center there. Akron then rents from that to have their own dispatch center within the facility. But then we have our own with Cogga Falls, Akron. And so we are the COG. We also contract with other communities that are not members of the COG, but they then pay us to run their dispatch out of our office. So Copley is doesn't have a sitting board member of the COG, but they contract with our dispatch center for dispatch services.
Got it.
I propose we don't touch that because we've done a lot of work on that. We should leave it alone.
You got it.
Don't touch any.
Just let it go. It's working. It's working.
And it's just not to skip around too much, but for the sake of we're already talking about it, in 8.05, that just says before we do that, enter into any contracting service, it has to go to the voters to approve. That happened, the voters approved it, and it is now we are in a COG instead of having the dispatch center, which used to be on the second floor of the police department. So it's a big empty space. If you ever want to go look, I can take you over there to see. But we used to have a dispatch center, and we had, I want to say, 2 or 3 dispatchers working at any given time, 24 hours up there in the second floor.
Can I ask a really dumb question? I should have Googled this when
Go.
I was reading this earlier. Dispatchers are basically just the people who answer like police emergency calls and fire emergency calls, right? Are they dispatching 911 calls, or is there other things they do?
Although there's a non-emergency line as well
Oh, there
that we
is.
have, and
Like if
they,
they were reporting somebody's creeping around my neighbor's house, they call
Like if you
that.
came around my backyard or something.
You'd report me to the 911. Exactly. If
I
they're
would-
creeping around
there's
my
a-
neighbor's house.
There's
it's
a
gonna be
sign,
me.
there's a sign that's going in the middle of the street.
yeah, I would say if there is someone creepy in your backyard, call the emergency line. If you're thinking, hey, there's a sign down in my neighborhood, or hey, there's a cat wandering or a loose
Okay.
dog that doesn't appear to be dangerous, that's when you call the non-emergency line.
When I see it creeping around.
Noise ordinance violations or the prohibition against roosters in the city.
Do we
Call
have a
them.
real prohibition against
Yeah, it
roosters?
is illegal to have a
Can we
rooster.
not
in the
dive
city.
into roosters?
I think people.
It's not in the charter, so we don't have to talk
Still
about
have
it.
PTSD from chicken in Kent
Okay,
conversations.
yeah, no.
I can't.
Things like that are not emergency
We
calls,
should all
but
have chickens.
strangers in your backyard are definitely emergency.
There's an urban chicken code.
Somebody has one.
Okay, all right.
The stolen signs.
Yeah.
For Diedrich.
Yes, that's
It's a
a,
criminal.
You can get charged criminally.
We should probably rein this back in now
yes.
again.
So,
We've gone off the rails.
not to,
I'm so pleased to know that random knowledge.
all right, so back to section 8.03. This is the police department. This is where the police department consists of the chief of police and other officers and personnel as council shall deem advisable. The police chief is subject to civil service provisions of the charter. And if you look at civil service, our civil service code, which Dennis, I'm sure you're very familiar with.
Yes.
Dennis's wife serves on the Civil Service Commission here in the city, so
Way to go.
she's
Good job, wife.
involved in that. So we have our own civil service code. In addition to the state has its own civil service code. We have to pass from the Civil Service Commission, and then council approves any deviations from the state code. So we can make it more stringent, less stringent, that sort of thing. But anything that deviates from the civil service code, we have to then pass through civil service and council. So this is just saying that the police chief is subject to those civil service codes. And they have their own section. It's not the same as a patrol officer or a sergeant or a lieutenant or a captain, but they are subject to that civil service commission. That notice in there where it modifies the section 12, article 12, that's the section on civil service. And then all other officers shall be appointed by the director of public safety, subject only to the applicable service provisions of the charter. And then you'll see on the next section, it's the fire department. The fire department shall consist of the fire chief and any other fire officers and personnel, and they are also subject to civil service commissions. Again, they have their own section on fire chief that's different from police chief because the qualifications and processes are different. So not much that I have other to comment on that, other than it's a pretty brief chapter. And when I asked each of the departments in question that we were talking about tonight, hey, do you have any suggestions or anything? The police and fire chief both said, it's pretty small provision. We have no comments, so.
Any questions? All right, let's go on to the law director.
Law director, a place
about
that's,
that
that's
Dodgy guy.
real close to my heart for unknown reasons. But this just says, first section says the law director is an elected position and that there's a 4-year term. And that's just where it says starting in 1991, that's when it became an elected position. Any questions on the 4-year term of the law director or it being elected?
When did you get elected? I should pay attention to that, but sorry.
I was appointed by the mayor and confirmed by council in January of last year.
Okay.
There is an election this fall for the unexpired term, and I will say that I am running to fulfill that unexpired term.
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
Why did it change from being appointed to being elected? And then why not appointed?
Yeah, and this is, I'll have to pull the meeting minutes from back in 1990 when this changed. I will say that it is a slew across the county of elected versus appointed. There are, at my last count, 5 elected law directors: Barberton, Talmadge, myself, Green. I already said Barberton. So maybe it's only 4. 4 elected. We'll go 4. 4 elected because that's the ones I can remember off the top of my head. The rest of the cities are either part-time or appointed by the mayor and confirmed by council. There are arguments for and against both.
What are the arguments on both sides?
Yeah, so the argument for it being an elected position is it holds the law director is then accountable to the people, not to any appointing authority. I represent the city and I represent every city board, commission, and employee when they're acting in their official capacity. So there could be an instance in another city where city council and the mayor might be at odds on something. And if the law director is appointed by the mayor, there could be a view of a conflict of interest in there. So this potentially could take that argument away because I don't report to the mayor. I report to the city and the people of the city. So there's that argument there. Now, the inverse of that, you could have a law director that doesn't get along with any other official because they were elected by the people. So it's kind of a check and balance or a kind of weigh the differences to it. I'm sure there are a slew of other reasons for and against, but we're not outside the norm of having an elected law director. There are other elected law directors within the county, and it's kind of normal.
I appreciate not having an appointed law director for the purpose of firing the law director at will when disagreements occur.
Yep.
I don't think that's appropriate.
Have you seen that happen before? I could see that
There's a
happening.
lot in the government that happens that we see playing out on a regular basis of who gets fired for disagreeing with people in offices across the country.
That goes back, and that's the exact same. It's the kind of the inverse of the argument that, you know, the law director might be beholden to the mayor. Yeah, because then you're also could be fired by the mayor if you disagree with.
It's a patronage
It seems
position.
like more,
Yes.
more of a chance that there's like politics involved rather than
Yes.
just serve the people.
Yes.
Correct. And with the finance director and the law director, there are fiduciary duties there. Again, because of the nature of the business that I have to give my legal opinion. And there's also that thing that I have a professional responsibility to my profession, that if I deviate from that, I could lose my law license. So it's just another thing to consider too. Does that answer everyone's questions? I'll pull the meeting minutes to see why they switched over to it for you.
Based on all of that, no one needs my opinion, but I think I like that you guys are elected. I was originally going, what a dumb thing to have to run for office for, but I think I like that better.
I was on council in Cuyahoga Falls. Theirs is an appointed law director appointed by the mayor and confirmed by council. So I've worked with both. I'm not going to say I have a preference.
That'd be inappropriate.
Okay, qualifications. Very similar to the qualifications of the finance director. It has to be 1 year prior to the date of the declaration of candidacy. They have to be an attorney in good standing and admitted to practice in the courts of Ohio. My office is here at City Hall, and I devote full-time effort during business hours and other times as necessary, which would be right now. Just to properly conduct the business of the municipality, and that I hold no other elected office while employed as this elected official. Any questions to that? That's, I will say that this office has jumped around. We've been at the safety building previously too. I like being in City Hall because it's convenient as opposed to being across the parking lot, but just throwing that out there too, that this hasn't always been the law office that's right up
Are
above.
you asking us to make a change? To the
I am not. I am not. I am half.
Steps in if you're across the
Really don't want to assign people office spaces in the church.
And that's, we talked about this when we talked about the clerk of council. At one point, the clerk of council had half the law department and half the attorneys were across the parking lot. So it was a little difficult to have your secretary and two of your attorneys in a different office than you and another attorney. So the setup's quite nice right now, I will just say. And then duties in general, I'm the legal advisor and attorney for the municipality and other duties that are consistent with the office that are required by council and the mayor. Pretty broad. Charter change. This one is kind of perfunctory. It's basically, as you guys know, we've walked through the ways you can change the charter. This is another way we can change the charter, but it is only to make things more coherent, consistent, or renumbering things, or if I deem that, hey, this doesn't, the way that it's typed up makes it very difficult to read. I can change that, but I can't change the actual wording of it. I can't change the interpretation. I can only reorder things, or if I notice there's a typo, I can correct the typo as opposed to having to go back to the people and say, hey, we noticed that we spelled people wrong. Can you correct that? But it also says that any correction has to go by council, and that I believe there's a section in here, it has to be unanimous. So it's not something that happens lightly. I have not done it in my time here, and I didn't see it done when I was the deputy, but it gives us the option that, hey, we noticed that there's something in here. Yeah.
Oxford commas. We're gonna fix it for.
Don't mess with commas. Commas change the meaning.
Any question of that?
I don't see it says it has to be unanimous by.
I'm thinking that was in the section on charter changes later. There, because we did talk about that, I think.
This is just be approved by a resolution of council.
Yeah, that's it. It's in section 1903, that I amend the charter without ballot approval for the purpose of striking provisions that are unconstitutional.
Okay.
So that's if a court
That's
says,
it.
hey, this provision is unconstitutional, that's when it has to be unanimous. So,
You know, all council.
yeah. So if I'm correcting a typo, it doesn't need unanimous.
That's when we learned about mandamus acts.
Yes, it is. Next section's vacancy. Again, very similar to the section we had previously with the finance director, that in the event of my death, resignation, recall, or removal, the mayor has the emergency power to appoint a temporary replacement for up to 75 days with council confirmation. And just to go back to the calendar, for those to see how this actually works in practice, because this actually happened. Jamie Six, the previous law director, resigned on effective January 12th. At that moment, because I was the deputy law director, which you see down below here at the very bottom of the vacancy section, I immediately became acting law director, regardless of residency until the replacement law director was appointed. A week later, on the 18th, the mayor appointed me as the emergency law director. And then a week after that, council confirmed me as the law director. So I went in about a 2-week period, two and a half week period, from being deputy law director to acting law director to emergency law director to the official law director. So I didn't change my template on any of my business cards during that time.
Thank you for that financial savings.
But if you do look at resolutions from the council meeting between January 12th and 25th, I signed as acting law director because that was my official title, not law director. So, and then again, the provision there about 31 days prior to the filing deadline, it just makes it so you don't have to have a rushed election, basically.
And you're gonna write up for the incapacitation piece for this one as well. Okay.
Yep. Now this one, just a quick note, will be, the other one will be, I'll just add it to the end of the finance director. So it'll be 6.08. This one will have to be 9.7 because there is a 9.6 that already exists. So just for record keeping purposes, I just want to let you guys know that. Outside legal counsel. So this is basically saying that the lawyers that the city employs in-house are the lawyers for the city. And the only way I can go and hire outside legal practice to assist me is with council approval. And it sets out there that it doesn't have to be for bill. So if I go out and get pro bono assistance to assist the city, I still have to get council approval for that. And it says that it has to be approved by a resolution. It has to say which specific attorney or firm of attorneys are helping and what representation they are limited to. So I can't just say, hey, approve X law firm to do all legal services that I deem necessary. It has to, it has to be specific. So you'll see we hire a number of outside law firms to assist us with various things like employment law. We have an employment law firm that assists us in employment law matters and labor negotiations, because again, we have 4 labor unions that the city negotiates with and has to approve contracts with, that we have specialized attorney in those fields. Council approves those. We also, a big topic of conversation right now are TIFs, tax increment finance. That's also a very niche area of law. The city employs an outside law firm to assist us drafting and doing TIF work. Same thing with bond counsel. Bond counsel is a super niche area of the law about what needs to be done. Our finance director has outside law that consults with the law department and counsel, but we hire various outside law firms. This specifically states that that we have to go through city council and have them approve any outside law. And it's, again, I understand the merit for this, because you don't want a bunch of attorneys that you have never met representing and giving legal opinions on behalf of the city, because, and this is just a quick foray into the legal field. You can hire a lawyer to give you a legal opinion on something, but that piece of paper doesn't really mean much. However, when the city law director makes an official legal opinion, it's like there, of course, there's always a hierarchy of these. It's the official interpretation of the law for the city. So if let's say X employee hires a lawyer to give them an opinion of how they do their duties, and that lawyer writes it up and gives it to them, that doesn't really mean much. But if I issue a legal opinion that says, if you perform your duties this way, you are acting within the bounds of the law, that's deferential and gives some defenses and liabilities are taken off of the city because they have acted on official legal capacity and legal advice from their attorney, the city's attorney. You don't want a bunch of willy-nilly attorneys out there offering opinions because, and especially in a zoning context, frequently the applicant will come in and say, look at this, we examined your code and your code said this is perfectly fine. That opinion doesn't really mean much. It might have, be persuasive, but if the law director says no, it follows this based on this, in a court of law, that opinion means more than that opinion. So that's part of the rationale for why you would want to have limited authority of retaining outside counsel. That way, because we represent the entire city and council, there should be a check and balance on
You'd have chaos
who,
otherwise.
yeah.
That makes sense.
So getting back to, just for clarification, and I'll use the TIFs as an example.
Yeah.
Do you need to get council's approval to get outside counsel to give you an opinion or to do work on a TIF by TIF? So the TIF for Sheets over on 59 versus the TIF for Miller's Landing.
No, so the ordinance, if you actually look back at the ordinance, it approves us to work with Squire Patton Boggs, the attorney firm we use, on economic development, and that TIFs fall under economic development.
So there are some umbrellas.
Yeah.
Type of language that could happen.
Yep. And
They
they
do not keep going back and forth and back and forth. So
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, so we don't have to constantly ask for another ordinance for the next TIF we're doing.
Right.
It's economic development purposes, because frequently too, TIFs are used as one tool in a tool belt of economic development. Another one you'll hear are CRAs, Community Reinvestment Act properties. They're viewed very similarly, and it's the same field, so we would use the same attorney as opposed to then having to go out, because there's also those economies of scale too, that we have an attorney who's familiar with our process and he's done TIFs here. Why would we go out and have another attorney do and pay the whatever fee to get them up to speed on it?
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
The caveat to all of this is in the event our insurer provides an attorney based on a policy, and that frequently happens, that if we're, say, and this is a car accident case, one of our plow trucks hits another car, we're sued in court, insurance would then provide the attorney. We don't have to go to council and have them approve that attorney because it's part of the policy. And the idea behind that is council's approved the policy of the insurance. And the provision in there is that they will then hire an attorney, and up to our deductible, they'll pay, that sort of thing. But that's the one caveat I'll throw out there. And frequently, depending on the type of case, insurances either have their preferred, or they'll say, oh, this is an employment, you have an employment issue, a wrongful termination. Do you guys employ a outside law firm for employment matters? Yes, it's these ones. They'll look at their credentials and say, all right, we're going to hire them to represent you in this instance, so that we're not having to go back out and find an employment law attorney that meets the insurance. It's like, no, they already are aware of this because they were aware of it before it was a case, because they helped write the policy, or, frequently there are some communications before a lawsuit is filed. There's some demand or that sort of thing. So it's just, that's the caveat in there. And that brings us to the end of the 4 sections we looked at today. So
we can visit just one thing on 8.05.
Yeah.
I noticed in the sheet you gave us about previous charter proposed amendments.
Yeah.
That in 2020, the Charter Commission proposed to repeal 8.05. I'm assuming the reason why to repeal it was because it was already passed, done.
Yeah.
Council approved it, we were already involved, there wasn't necessarily any need to have that in place anymore. That's why I'm thinking that's what the case was. Why was that turned down? Do you have any?
My guess is, so here, just based on my reading of this right now, that say the SARCOG falls, or it folds a year from now. That means, based on this provision, we would immediately have to start our own dispatch center right back up. We couldn't contract with another agency because this provision didn't exist. If we repealed this, it wouldn't have, like, this gives us that if the SARCOG folds, we have another mechanism to enter into an agreement with another agency.
But, okay, so the idea then is, in terms of repealing this, that would be the reason why we would want to repeal this piece
So
of
that
it.
you
No.
could quickly.
No, so like the rationale, and I could pull the meeting minutes if you want me to see what council's rationale, but what I could see in this situation, say 2 years from now, SARCOG folds, we would then have to create our own dispatch center or enter into a contract with another place. The voters should have the ability to determine whether or not we contract with another place or go back to our own facility, as opposed to, because when they voted on and approved the SARCOG, it said we're entering the SARCOG with Cuyahoga Falls, Talmadge, the county,
Right, it
and
was very specific.
yeah. So if there was another agency, hey, we're going to contract with Akron now. Well, the people might not want to contract for dispatch with Akron. They might say, let's either find a different place or let's restart our dispatch center. The reason for keeping this provision is so the city couldn't just contract with another agency without voter approval.
Okay.
And the city wouldn't be able to just withdraw from SARCOG without voter approval, right? Well, withdraw and then go say we're gonna give our business to Akron.
Yes, we could not do that without voter approval because of this section. Now, we could withdraw and start our own dispatch center again if we wanted, but because of this, it's saying we can't enter into any other agreement with anyone else with any entity for dispatch service without voter approval. And I think the rationale, and again, I can pull the meeting minutes if you want, but I think the rationale is dispatch is such an important part of public safety.
Yeah, you can't have it.
That, yeah, the voters should have a say in where we're dispatching, not just where, is cheapest,
Yeah.
Don't go through the work yet.
Okay.
For me, I don't know if anybody else wants to see that, but I don't think it's necessary for me at this moment.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? All right, so next meeting, topic discussion. So, obviously, if we keep going in line, we probably want to talk about Article 10 and 11, but also leave room to review from the town hall, the pieces that we have proposed and had written up that we get feedback on, that we can then potentially vote on those as well at the next meeting to get them some of those off the council, if that makes sense. Anyone have an issue with that plan of action?
So just put on the agenda 10 and 11,
And
and then review of
The
town
Yeah,
hall,
town hall.
and start talking, have discussions as to
Yeah,
next
we
steps.
could,
of the council.
we could choose to vote at the next meeting to send some of the items to council to get that process started.
When's our next meeting?
And so we have town hall on the first and then meeting on the second.
Okay. That's what I have.
One question. Did we ever get back together on that question about why we have such dumb election cycles? I would love to revisit that. I remember we were gonna talk to you about it.
We
I
talked
don't know
about,
if I missed one and you guys resolved that and
No, we
everybody
talked
wants
about pushing
2-year
it off.
election cycles.
We were talking about terms.
yeah,
Yeah, we were
Yeah.
waiting till we got
It
the
was
term.
like
once we
2
get, yeah,
years
Yeah.
plus the entirety of council at
Yeah.
once. I was like, oh, that's.
Yeah, so we were
Yeah.
kicking it till we got to the term
Yeah.
section later on.
Okay, I'm happy to wait, just I didn't
Yeah.
wanna, I was just wondering if we.
You're right.
If we're
Sorry,
done with
needed
that
to-
or.
I need the context back to it, so that's, so thank
Yeah,
you.
the
Rick.
context was, we get rid of all of council every 2 years, and that's a lot of time running for
I
office.
think it was section 16.
Yeah, Article 16 is
Even if we
nominations and
staggered
elections.
them, and they all ran for office every 2 years, but we staggered them, that feels more sensible, but.
And just for planning purposes, to let you guys know, I like the idea of going through Article 10 and 11 and then reviewing everything. I think the next meeting after that, we could knock out 12, 13, 14, and 15 at one meeting, because they're also pretty brief, simple ones.
Yeah.
And I think we should, just based on looking at the extent of the research and all that, Articles 16 and 17 should be one meeting, because that's gonna be a big topic. We've punted a lot towards
Yeah.
term limits and cycles and that sort of thing. That's gonna be those two sections. Just as you're looking ahead, but just so you guys know that 10 and 11 will have some interesting things you'll want to look through and talk, because that's planning and zoning and BZA.
Zoning is always fun.
And we're gonna have, before you got here, the planning director was finishing up planning commission, and I told him to come to the next meeting, so he'll
Wonderful.
be here too to talk about that section, but.
And I would like to, ideally, that's why the next meeting, if we can go through the items that we have and get any feedback and get those sent off before we necessarily get to some of the other ones,
Mhm.
and get council looking at those, so we don't get a clog on one topic and we don't lose out on the other work that we've already done.
It's really
So,
sensible.
because we don't wanna
Yeah, that's-
get them, like, because of the history, also potential challenges and issues with that topic of terms,
Mhm.
get the ones that we want addressed, send it off to them to move forward on, I think is appropriate. For the, go Denny, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm very concerned about April 1st, the town hall meeting. It seems like, we're planning to have it out here in the, council area. We haven't had any discussion whatsoever as far as what could be coming towards us as far as questions and so forth.
We thought you'd field all those questions.
Bless your heart. I'll say, don't ask me. Are we actually prepared as a group, are we actually prepared to stand in front of anybody if anybody shows up? We haven't had any, confirmation on who's gonna come or feelings of who's gonna be here. But if people do show up, are we comfortable that we're prepared to handle their questions? I don't want to get in a predicament. I've been on the school board, don't want to get in a predicament. I'll
I
say,
heard those are.
I don't know.
Can I ask another follow-up question to that? Do we have to answer questions next week, or is our job just to listen and to take notes?
I
what they'd
think
like
we're gonna
to pay
have that,
attention to.
when you have those people standing out in front of you, trust me, and they ask you, what are you saying? What are you going to do?
We are taking your concerns into consideration. That is a really great question.
Mhm.
Well, I think the,
Getting
I
a lot
think
of that
the,
reflection.
I think the idea of the town hall and the focus where I was coming from with it and what we do is we say, this is the sections that we've gone through. Does anyone have any thoughts on it? Allowing them to share that. We share our things that we've had written up already, share that, get feedback, make sure we open it from the very beginning. If there's questions, we're not necessarily, we just are very open with them. We're getting feedback so then we can go in and send stuff off to council. We don't make any final decisions. We need to make sure they understand we don't make any final decisions. Council makes final decisions. We send stuff up to council, they make final decisions on whether it actually gets to the ballot or not. So I think if
So
we.
the purpose of the town hall is to say, we're gathering not just our own opinions on this charter, but we want to hear their opinions to make sure we can integrate those
Yes.
on the proposals for council,
Okay.
which does let us off the hook a little bit next week.
Yeah.
You're nervous.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you and I'm gonna ask Danny. Somebody comes to you and says, we heard that you were talking about the number of wards. How many wards do you think we should have?
I think we need to refer it to
Point that
council.
right at
Yep,
council?
point it right at council to review it, because that's what we're gonna ask council to do. we're not proposing anything. From what we've said, we are not planning on proposing anything for it at
Okay.
this time. We would direct it to council
I
that we
can
think
handle
council
that.
should review it. Because
I can handle
that's what it is. We are just a preparer of documents to pass to council to say, we think you might want to look at these things. And then they could choose anything that we submit to them. They could choose to
Right.
revise
Either
it.
in a bundle or single.
Or change it or do anything with it.
So I would just preface it a little bit to say that at this time, this is where we are at
Yeah.
as a group. And things are still subject to change based on feedback and other discussions that we will be having, you know, as we continue on. But at
Nothing
this
we're talking
time,
about is final, yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
Yeah.
I can handle that.
Easy deflection too is also say you guys have a point
Talk
of
to Drew.
we have a defer to the law department. You also have a public comment section at every one of your meetings. You can always say that too if they want further feedback or further information.
We encourage you to come.
Yep.
Yeah.
so by my count, what I have right now. So I think the way the meeting would go is we would talk about, these are the sections we reviewed.
Mhm.
Here's some base ideas of what we discussed. We have 3 written ordinances that at this point in time, this is what we have. We have not voted on these yay or nay. We're looking for feedback on these. This is what's in these ordinances, this is what the change would be, right? Explaining that. And then we want to review specific topics that we've talked about, or once we go through that, say, okay, this is where what we reviewed and discussed up to this point in time, we are now open for public comment and for feedback.
Is council gonna be here?
We have sent the invite to them and I announced it at the last council meeting as well.
So what I'm thinking, what you're saying there, what I was gonna actually, the next piece I was gonna ask was, Drew, is there a standard Stow cities slide deck? I'm sure there probably is, knowing you.
Yes, there is.
Great. And then if we could just, obviously, we know how the ordinance is written and how it has to be submitted, but are you able to just copy the exact
Yes.
changes and put it in a way that every normal person would be able to look at it and go, that makes sense, AKA me, outside of that?
So it's not these 3 pages is what you're saying? You just want
Yeah,
to see
just
the text changes?
Yeah.
Like this, like the text changes.
Yeah.
Like the one text change is going from August 1st to July 1st.
Yeah.
Right, so that's text change 1. Text change 2 is the appointment of the Charter Commission by the end of January.
Yep.
Right,
Mhm.
that's text change number 2. And then the third one was cleaning up the language of, I think, both mayor and council around the terms and appointments and things along those lines. And it was just like, it's only one sentence, I think.
Well, then there's the posting. one,
There's the
too.
posting of the public meetings too.
Oh, that's
So-
the 4th one. So
Yes,
there's
well,
4.
it's, so there's, just to make sure we're clear on this, there is the one that has to do with the charter review. We did version 2, which includes both July 1 and January.
Right.
That's 1. 2 is the acting mayor cleanup language, and then 3 is the public posting notice. So there were 3.
Yes.
Those are the 3 that we have, that we've drafted up. And now, question is, we talked about tonight 2 more changes.
Yes,
Do
that's what I was
you,
gonna ask, the appropriateness of at least saying we've talked about this piece.
Mhm.
Not necessarily, we're not gonna present because we don't have any language that's even presented to us.
But if we don't have the language, and I wouldn't suspect we'd have language, but I think we could at least make a statement that
We've requested for
we
this.
requested language to make this, to add this additional
Yep.
piece for finance and law director.
The other pieces at the town hall, obviously, people have watched our meetings as well. Do we want to bring up the conversation of that we were discussing the wards, and we're going to ask council to review the wards, and that we've added that? Or do we not bring that up?
I bring it up.
What?
Danny, I would bring it
I
up.
would agree with you. I was trying to get
I
feedback.
think not surprising people is
Yes.
usually better.
That's,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I wasn't running amok.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any problem with that. I think.
We're not proposing any changes. We're just asking.
Correct, just saying that in other discussions that we've had,
Yeah.
and I think those are probably the two big ones. I don't think we've had any other discussion. We've had more clarification discussions and actually change discussions. Those are the two that we sort of started bantered around and sort of kicked down the pike a little bit and say, these are the other two areas that we think we need some review, we need feedback on. The number of wards, and I don't think there's anything wrong with us saying, if we look around the cities around us and we look at other cities within the state that are equal, you know, they generally have 6 wards, not 4, right? We've seen statistically and, you know, so it's sort of from qualified information. Then the other side is the discussion around terms, right? That we've sort of talked about it. We're going to focus more on it when we get to this section. However, we're looking for feedback. And we have had, I don't know if you guys have, but I have had multiple people come and tell me, first things out of their mouth is 4 years staggered.
Yes.
4 years staggered.
Yeah.
I don't even, you know, we didn't even talk. What do you think about the charter? And I'm on the commission. What do you guys think? Is there any, what do you guys have? What do you want? And all I hear is 4 year staggered.
Yeah.
That's all I hear. And no other qualifications to it.
See,
You know
all
exactly.
my
really thought
conversations
people
have been
would
about
talk-
wards. Everyone that I talk to in like the business community say wards, like more wards,
Yeah.
not necessarily, which means more council, so. Yeah.
I'm not hearing about words.
Well, and
I'm talking to a very different crowd.
Yeah.
Than
the
what I'm doing.
caveat there, I'll tell you, is that the zoning code is currently being rewritten and it's separate and apart from the charter. So
So
that
we don't
might,
get to play with the zoning code here?
not the zoning process you do. That's what we're gonna talk about next Wednesday,
You could
but not the
apply for
actual
that.
code.
We said that would do.
Jenny, what are the people saying to you? Because I've heard, like Rick, what are they saying to you about wards?
That we just are, like, they know, but comparable around us, that there's more wards in other cities and that they think it should be reviewed.
So
How would
are
that
they-
affect the business committee? Sorry, I
Oh, go ahead.
am so sorry.
Well, if there's a section, a ward that is overly heavy with businesses, but there's also with that piece, their voice could technically in the business world be condensed versus if it's split up, like, because even when you keep neighborhoods together, you could be splitting business areas up, then there could be more voice through those wards for those council seats.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
And that's kind of like unbalanced right now too.
Yeah, but it's just more of like that active voice piece of things, that there would be more avenues to convey concerns and issues and challenges.
Yeah, if you look at the map of our current wards, there are 2 that are very business heavy, the business sections, and then 2 that are very residential. Wards 2 and 3 are the northeastern part and the middle part of the city, whereas wards 1 and 4 are kind of, you know, the southeast over by Giant Eagle Mire and all that, and then also the fog buildings in the Seasons Road and Route 8 corridor.
The industrial areas, yeah. So that's what I've been hearing, so from that. Now, if you asked me, it would also be let's have the conversation about council terms, but that's not what I've heard from other people this time, so.
Okay.
Cool.
Just as also throwing this out there, if you want it, we have a countdown clock. If you want to limit each comment to a set amount of time,
Yes.
you don't that's up to the Charter Review Commission. You guys can set how long you want comments to be, but we have a giant clock that you can put up so that people know this is how much time they have.
Is there a standard in other?
3 minutes, 3 minutes is pretty
Thank you,
normal.
that's what I wanted the opinion.
Yep.
It's usually 3 minutes.
Yeah.
It never works, but it's usually.
I wanted to know what the best practice was,
You're pretty good at.
or the common practice, maybe not always the best practice.
Drew, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is there any way that between the 4 wards that we have, that we can see any kind of breakdown as far as businesses versus residential?
I would have to get with the zoning department to see how we would be able to quantify that. But yeah,
I don't want to get really you know, stretch it out too much, just that, you know, Gecko is a business, you know, and, Giant Eagle is a business. But if you start getting down to the small ones that they sell trinkets, you know, I don't care about
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Yeah, I'd have to get with the planning department to see how. Well, we do have
Trinket one.
I
we
do.
do have
I
home
care about my-
occupation,
Yeah.
permits within the city,
I
so,
care about my 1 to 5 business, 1 to 5 employee businesses.
yes. I'll get with them and see what we can figure out.
That way there's
Yeah,
no-
that's,
It would help if we start going down
90%
that
of my
path
work that I do.
to know if we're gonna, you know, ask council to consider an, additional wards, what those wards have.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
It's a data point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it could be a good data point. But I was also, where I was thinking about if when we asked councils, ask for them to review the wards currently in the process and leave it open for that next temporary commission to be appointed to then do that piece of work for it. Just because it is more of a like, hey, we recommend you should review this process, not here's why you should review it. And
Yeah.
more of like, hey, the data just seems like we should review it. Vet it, so. Yeah. All right, and yep,
Are you going to do the slides?
yeah, I was gonna, so that's,
we'll do them, and I'll get them out before, so that everyone can see them before
and we'll get the slides set up. The idea is make it as clear and concise and simple as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we spend 15, 20 minutes on our side talking, and then hopefully there's participants, open it up to them and to get that feedback. That's really what we want to do, is get the feedback. That's our key.
We've been blasting out as much as we can.
Yeah, well, we were
We've all
talking.
been, we've all been blasting it, yeah, everywhere, so.
We'll get some persons.
Yeah.
We'll show up.
All right, any other business from anyone? Okay. All right, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, thanks all.
Thank you. See everybody next Tuesday.
You go, Seth.
Yes.